Welcome to EPG Pathashala. My name is Dugirala Vasanta. I am on the teaching faculty of Department of Linguistics, Osmania University. What I am going to talk to you today belongs to course 10, module 8 on sentence comprehension. Okay, basically there are two objectives to my lecture today. One is I'll try and explain about the role of some linguistic factors like syntactic, semantic and pragmatic factors, and role of cognitive factors like attention and memory in helping us understand the meaning of sentences. The second objective is to try and tell you about the language specificity in sentence comprehension. That means that it's not universal, like there are certain things about our native language which enable us to understand reach the meaning of the sentence. Let's take examples of two sentences. Suppose you hear this sentence A is, you will see it on the screen, time flies like an arrow. Sentence B, fruit flies like a banana. Now think about it, at surface level they both seem alike. The sentences are very similar in their structure, and yet sentence B, fruit flies like a banana, appears somewhat difficult to comprehend the meaning, unlike the first sentence. We should think about why, what exactly is the difference between these two sentences, meaning, how our brain is to capture the meaning of these two sentences. Why is it, even though surface level they sound similar, there is second sentence appears to be somewhat difficult. Going back to the history of psycholinguistics in terms of sentence comprehension research, due to the influence of transformational grammar which was prevalent in the 1960s and 70s, researchers came up with a theory called derivational theory of complexity, known as DTC. This theory explains the differences in grasping the meaning of sentences. For instance, let's take another pair of sentences. The cat chased the rat. You all know it's an active sentence. The rat was chased by the cat is a passive sentence. You learned that when you first learning English. Now, according to DTC, passive sentences are thought to be syntactically more complex than active sentences, and therefore we require a little bit more time to understand the meaning of the passive sentence. Let's spend a minute thinking about what DTC is saying about passive versus active sentence comprehension. Surface passive forms of a sentence is derived from underlying active form. Because passive is removed from the basic underlying logical form, it's far away, it takes longer to process and understand its meaning. So if that is true in psycholinguistic research, we should exhibit more pauses and or take longer time to understand the meaning of a sentence that is given to you in an experiment. Let's look at some more examples. Suppose you are asked to think about the sentence, he caught her. This is a straightforward sentence, no transformation present. Second sentence is, he didn't catch her. It's a little more complex because there is a negative transformation takes place. The third sentence, she was caught by him. Again, it's passive and therefore a little more difficult than the first sentence. Fourth sentence is, she wasn't caught by him. Here there are two transformations, both negative and passive. So according to derivational theory of complexity, among these four sentences, which one is most complex and we take longer to understand? It's the fourth sentence because there are two transformations, whereas the other three sentences don't have as many transformations. So this is the explanation given at that time. It is a syntax centric explanation. At that time, they thought syntax can explain the difficulty we experience in understanding the meanings of sentences. So basically, DTC relies on what is known as clause, which is a basic unit for sentence. So the clause, it's called clausal hypothesis. DTC relies on clausal hypothesis. According to this clausal hypothesis, we basically chunk, before we understand a sentence, we chunk it. chunking is a psychological notion, but can be applied to language also to understand how we get to the meaning of different sentences. Suppose you are given a telephone number 46356338. Either you are told orally or you see a number written 4635638. Now, if you have to remember this and recollect and report to someone, it would be much easier if we chunked this number into 4635638. So, if we divide it, we will remember it easily. Even when you see it or when we hear it, chunking helps us, and that is the explanation that DTC people give for understanding the differences in getting to the meaning of different type of sentences. Now, in other words, we are talking about language chunking. Language chunking is assumed to proceed on the basis of sentence structure. When we come across a sentence, whether we hear a sentence or whether we see a sentence, we chunk them into clauses. Researchers devise experiments to demonstrate how syntax interferes or facilitates sentence processing. So, let us look at one such experiment. This experiment is called click location experiment. What they do is the participant will be given a sentence in print, but the participant will also be given the same sentence through the ears. So, for instance, they will hear sentence A, the teacher who taught the biggest class was given extra pay by her principal. Notice that in the word class, which on your screen you will see it highlighted by red some color, in the middle of the class there is a click. You are not allowed to listen to that particular word properly, right? You are supposed to understand what it was. Let us take sentence B. Sentence B reads like this, or if you are hearing it, you hear it like this: the very pretty and talented girl was the runner-up in the Miss India contest. Now, the researchers found out that sentence B is easier to understand than sentence A, right? That is, basically the participant has to mark on the written sentence given to them where the click occurred. That is the experiment. Click location is the task of the participant. They were able to locate the click much faster and better in type sentences like type B sentence than A sentence. Now, the explanation for this is, in other words, also we can put it the other way, participants made more errors on sentence A type of sentences than B type of sentences. Basically what happened in sentence A is click was at the boundary between subject and predicate, alright, the predicate of the main clause, which is also the end of the relative clause. You can go back and look at the sentence. The teacher who taught the biggest class was given the extra pay by her principal. Okay, so the class is occurring at the boundary between the subject part and the predicate part. What exactly happened, In sentence B, on the other hand, the location of the click and the syntactic boundary did not clash. They were not clashing, and therefore they were easier to process. In other words, using click location experiments, researchers tried saying it is the syntax of the sentence which determines how easily we understand the meaning, or what kind of difficulties we encounter. That is, the more complex the syntax of the sentence, the longer we take to understand its meaning. But then there are some limitations to this clausal hypothesis. Let us look at those limitations. The DTC experiments did not always succeed in offering conclusive evidence to the role of clause, that we always parse sentences into clauses and then understand its meaning. It is not supported. There is some controversy about these experiments, the results of these experiments, because we don't consciously think of transformations present in different sentences. Transformation is an abstract idea in linguistics. Ordinary people don't think sentences in terms of whether it has 2 transformations or 1 transformation, what is a clause. So we also don't keep in memory that basic underlying surface form. There is no proof that what we store in our mind is the basic form, alright. And also DTC is ignoring the fact that active forms, which are supposed to be easy to understand, they may be easy not because they are an active form, which is a syntax based explanation, but because they are more common in language. More common is about frequency of occurrence. That is not being projected in the syntax centric explanations in the 60s and 70s when DTC experiments were happening. In spite of this whole research in sentence comprehension was dominated by it's a technical word, parsing, which is very much important in computational linguistics. So let's deal with the idea of parsing. What is parsing? Parsing is assigning elements of surface structure of a sentence to different linguistic categories, right? So those categories are usually phrase markers. If you are a student of linguistics, when you first they teach you about drawing a sentence syntactic tree structure for a sentence, they teach you about phrase markers. So when we hear a sentence or read a sentence, there is a parser in our mind which is supposed to make these cuts, phrases and clauses and things like that. That's what parsing is about. Now, in the 70s psycholinguistic researchers said the parser works based on 2 major strategies. The first strategy is called late closure. This strategy says that wherever possible, when we are hearing a sentence, attach the new item to the current constituent. So for instance, let's take an example. On the screen you will see the sentence, Tom said that Bill had taken the garbage out yesterday. Now if you think about it, that yesterday, which is an adverb, did Tom say something yesterday or did he take out the garbage yesterday? Right? It's not clear. But according to late closure strategy, they say that you must attach yesterday to the last this thing. So taken the garbage out yesterday. Yesterday attaches to taken the garbage out, not to Tom, right? So that's the. So then I'm sure you are wondering, but how do you know? You are just saying it. What is the evidence? Much of this evidence is obtained from much later in the 90s when eye trackers are available. They were able to say that when a person's eyes are monitored, the eyes go back to yesterday's, the eye attaches yesterday to the previous phrase and not to Tom. The eye movement can be monitored to prove that late closure strategy is correct. Okay, there was some little bit of proof like that, but there is a controversy about this strategy also. We'll come to that later. Okay, before we move to the next strategy, let's take one more example of late closure and how it works in sentence comprehension. So if the sentence is, the samosa with the sauce that was tasty didn't win the prize. In a sentence like this, that was tasty in the relative clause, does it go with the samosa or with the sauce? Answer is the sauce, because it occurs later than samosa. So that's the explanation given by late closure. Now there is another famous strategy offered for parsing that's called minimal attachment. This strategy states that we attach new items into the phrase marker being constructed using fewest syntactic nodes consistent with our language. So suppose the sentence given to you is, a thief shot the cop in the park. According to this strategy, the prepositional phrase in the park goes with the verb phrase shot the cop, such that the syntactic tree has only 2 nodes and not more nodes. For this you have to look at the tree diagram on the screen. So here the prepositional phrase PP is going with the verb phrase, so there are only two nodes. So this is the minimal attachment, example of minimal attachment, whereas if you make a tree like this is also possible, but it has more nodes. Therefore, the parser, the strategy, minimal attachment strategy says, accept, prefer this way of dividing, parsing the sentence so that you understand the meaning quickly. Okay, so this is minimal attachment strategy. Basically, what are these strategies trying to say? Minimal attachment or late closure. They're talking about the underlying idea is, are we engaged in parallel processing or serial processing? Parallel processing means constructing multiple interpretations and waiting for evidence about which is right. Serial processing is constructing only one interpretation first and then another one only if the first one turns out to be wrong. Okay, so we will have to look at some more examples in order to go further to understand this. In other words, the parsing strategies support the so-called serial modular processing, which is in recent years it has been contested. What I mean by serial modular is that syntax first, that when we hear a sentence, we look at the structure, engage in parsing it into phrases and clauses, and only then reach the semantics. So syntax module followed by semantic module. That is what the parsing literature is trying to say. There has been a lot of criticism about the syntax first models, and yet throughout up until into the decade of 80s, a whole lot of parsing research took place to understand ambiguity in sentences, sentence interpretation, right? Very often we hear sentences with ambiguity, especially they are called, some of them are temporary ambiguity, and they are called Gardenpast sentences. Gardenpast sentence is a metaphor, they use it to say that suppose we are wandering around a garden with a big maze and we get lost, so we trace back. So they're using this to say when we hear a sentence with temporary ambiguity, our parser proceeds to analyze it. Suddenly we get lost, the sentence is not making any sense, then we come back. So let's look at some of these Gardenpast sentences. That Gardenpast sentences basically are saying comprehension is an incremental process. This is one of the most famous sentences in psycholinguistics literature dealing with sentence comprehension. A whole lot of papers have been written about this sentence. The sentence is, the horse raced past the barn, fell. I repeat it again, the horse raced past the barn, fell. In this sentence, raced can be understood as past tense of race, right? That is one interpretation. So if you think that horse raced in the past tense sense, then what fell? We come to the fell and say, what? The horse raced past the barn, fell. What fell? Barn fell, horse fell. We get very confused. So it is a Gardenpast sentence which is confusing us. Then the other explanation is, if raced is treated as participial, that is, it's a racing horse, then someone is racing and the horse fell. So basically, if raced has the past tense interpretation, we understand the sentence as though it was horse by itself which raced past the barn. How then will fit? We won't be able to fit the fell into the sentence. So we experience what is known as Gardenpast effect. So, but if we treat raced past the barn as a relative clause with raced as a participle, then what happens? Basically, we understand the sentence as the horse which was raced past the barn fell. In the original sentence, which was not there. That's why that is called reduced relative clause. In English it's allowed, you don't have to say which was. You can say the horse raced past the barn fell. Alright? There was not much discussion about, not at the point of ambiguity, but what about the verb itself? If the verb wasn't raised, but if it was driven, the ambiguity would not have been there. So there are many reasons for our difficulty in reaching the meaning of a sentence. It need not be only syntax. But then the researchers kept saying structural ambiguity arises if there is more than one preceding noun that could be modified by the relative clause. See, much work in psycholinguistics on sentence comprehension engaged with sentences which have relative clauses. Now, in relative clause sentence, let's look at one more sentence. The journalist interviewed the daughter of the mayor who had had the accident. Who had the accident? Is the daughter or the mayor? Right? You get that. According to late closure strategy we discussed earlier, the relative clause should be attached to the second noun phrase. Okay, so it was the mayor who had the accident, not the daughter, because late closure, it comes later. Okay, but what happened was, that's how the English speakers predominantly responded. Yeah, of course, it's the mayor who had the accident. But when the similar sentences were given to Spanish speakers, Spanish allows a sentence with relative clause just like the English sentence, but the relative clause in Spanish modifies the first noun, not the second. That is, first noun is daughter, remember. That is how the Spanish speakers interpreted. In other words, they took less time to read the sentence if they are allowed to interpret as though the daughter who had the accident and not the mayor who had the accident. So if relative clause modified the first noun, English speakers had garden path effect. If it modified the second noun, Spanish speakers had garden path. So in psycholinguistics, once it started going beyond English, a whole lot of cross-linguistic research began to happen in the 80s and 90s. So when this research involved languages which are very different from English, both structurally and typologically, the parsing strategies which were thought universal, late closure, minimal attachment, originally researchers thought this will work for all languages. But the cross-linguistic research clearly showed parsing strategies cannot be universal. They will not work for all the languages. There is a need, therefore, to move to look at some semantic level. Now, so far we have been talking only about structure, phrases, clauses, relative clauses, where it should attach, NP, VP. This is the language of syntax. Now we need to move into semantic clues or semantic factors which will have an impact on understanding the meaning of sentences. So by about late 80s also, researchers started paying attention to mapping between syntax and semantics. What they are saying is, in trying to figure out how we understand the meaning of sentences, we must not prioritize only syntax. We must look at how syntax and semantics map onto each other. Alright? So they began to pay attention to function of linguistic elements, not just structures, not just saying clause and phrase and relative clause and things like that, but of course these constituents are important, but what is the function? What function do they play in sentences? So what gave the motivation for this shift? This is the observation that subject relative clauses, in all these experiments, when they analyzed the data more closely, they found majority of the people were understanding subject relative clauses faster than object relative clauses. Why? So if relative clause alone is the explanation, which is causing ambiguity, and you apply late closure, that if that is the case, there should not be any difference between subject relative clause and object relative clause. Let's look at some examples of what are subject relative clauses and what are object relative clauses. Sentence A on the screen, what you will see, the reporter that attacked the collector admitted the error. Okay, remember this sentence? Now you listen to another sentence. The reporter that the collector attacked admitted the error. What is the difference between these two sentences? In the first sentence, it's the reporter who admitted the error, and the focus is on the subject. In the second sentence, the reporter that the collector attacked. So who admitted the error? It's the collector. So the majority of the people found the subject relative clauses easier to understand, faster to read than the object relative clauses. Now this led to research using what is known as filler gap sentences. Again here syntax plays a role, but they are trying to see mapping. So since research has shown that object relative clause contains more ambiguity than subject relative clause, so basically what they are saying is that's because, let's go back to the examples of the sentence again. Sentence B is supposed to take longer to understand, the reading times are longer. Why? It's because the gap should be filled with the reporter that the collector attacked. So collector attacked the reporter, and that reporter is removed, it's far away, and therefore we took longer to understand. So it's filler and gap, that's why they're called filler gap sentences. Alright, you can see still this is more syntax oriented explanation. The researchers who began to say that syntax explanation is not enough, we need to look more closely at semantics, began to pay attention to the notion of animacy. They noticed that object relative clauses tend to go with inanimate beings. Alright, so when an animate being appears in the object position, our mind gets confused. So whether the person who is doing the action, the sentence is explaining an action, right? The person who is doing the action normally tends to be animate. If it is inanimate, then that is confusing us a little bit. So the mapping of form and the meaning, this question of who will do what, whether a stone can do some action or whether only human beings can do some action, is our knowledge. It's a meaning based, world based knowledge. That knowledge is interacting with the syntactic structure of the sentence. So there is a mapping between syntax and semantics in trying to get to the meaning. Alright, so mapping of form and meaning, which leads speakers to favor a form that reduces difficulty in understanding the meanings. In other words, even in complex sentences with relative clauses, the relative pronouns, the type of relative pronoun can create difficulty. Let's look at relative pronouns, how they occur. If a verb comes directly after the relative pronoun in a sentence, then the relative pronoun is a subject pronoun. So subject pronouns are necessary. So for instance, if you say the boy who is the relative pronoun? There is a verb following it. The boy who is wearing glasses. So you can't skip the is. I mean, you have the boy who is wearing glasses is in that form, you have to maintain that form like that. So on the other hand, if there is no verb immediately after the relative pronoun, instead there is a noun or a pronoun, then the relative pronoun is an object pronoun. The object pronoun can be left off. So if you say the boy who I met at the summer camp, actually you can leave out that. You can just say the boy I met at the summer camp. It's optional. This pronoun, object relative pronoun, is optional as opposed to subject relative pronoun. So this is the linguistic knowledge that is guiding our comprehension. So what is the question of where is animacy here? Animate beings are conceptually more salient, and in our understanding we feel animacy is very important characteristic. This leads to their being preferred in the object position in general, particularly in relative clauses. So thematic template mapping is language specific. In other words, verbs and their arguments map onto each other, and this mapping varies from language to language. How verbs map onto their arguments is language specific. Now, besides animacy animacy is one example of semantic factor which influences language comprehension. Besides this, psycholinguists have also argued that memory also plays a role in understanding the meaning of sentences. So, there is a lot of explanation given to you in the e-text of this module on memory and sentence processing. A model of memory was given to you with a diagram. So, please read that to understand about the architecture of the memory, what is short term memory, what is working memory, long term memory, all this. I will not be dealing with that in this lecture, but please do consult the e-text. Researchers have noted difficulty in comprehension is partly due to failure in retrieving the product of past analysis. We analyze a sentence, but suddenly we lose track of what we have analyzed, and that failure to retrieve momentarily that information is what causes difficulty in understanding meaning of the sentence. So, they call this retrieval interference. That is, even when there is a small amount of intervening material between elements of dependency, again we have to draw on syntax, between the subject and the verb, then retrieval operation could become prone to interference. So, but of course, what can come between subject and verb depends upon the word order of a given language. So, in languages with subject, verb, object word order, the canonical structure, the commonly easily understood structure is agent, action, patient. Alright. In other words, there appears to be a preference or more or less universal preference for agent initial. In any sentence, first word that occurs is agent. Alright. But if there is a conflict between the form and the meaning, then the brain exhibits difficulty, it throws electrical signals, they are called evoked response potentials, to show that there is something going wrong here in the sentence. I can't understand. Your eyes go back, your brain throws an electrical response. You will learn more about ERPs in the neurolinguistics modules as part of this course. So, I will not explain further here, but brain indicates your difficulty in understanding the meaning of the sentence when there is a clash, when the first word in the sentence is not agent, there is some temporarily you get confused. So, actor's role has a cognitive salience and is considered as a neural attractor category. That means it is a language independent factor. That is, irrespective of what language we are talking about, actor's role is what we grasp. A human being, what can be done by a human, what cannot be done by a human, this kind of a knowledge is universal. It is not dependent on a given language. It has a lot of cognitive salience. Other than the memory related factors, there is also the question of attention. Much research on the role of attention in sentence comprehension took place in the 90s. It's because this research requires different kind of tools, research tools like eye tracker and things like that. They were not available in the 70s. So, in the 90s they used eye trackers and they were able to study how children interpret the meaning of sentences. They hear when they are provided certain kind of visual clues. So, we conduct all a conversation with other human beings looking at each other. We have a lot of other visual clues. Now, I hope you have noticed we have moved from strict structure based, syntax based explanation to semantics, semantics to memory, attention, and now we are seeing even non-linguistic cues from the environment sometimes guide our comprehension. So, this particular research with children using eye tracker is referred to as visual world paradigm, and I will show you on the next on the screen. You will see how they collect data using visual world paradigm to understand how children interpret meaning of sentences like, suppose you tell the child, put the frog on the napkin in the box. alright. This is slightly ambiguous. If our comprehension is incremental, the child start putting the frog on the napkin. Put the frog on the napkin. But what you are saying is put the frog on the napkin in the box, right? So unambiguous sentence would be put the frog that's on the napkin. The moment you say that's on the napkin, the ambiguity is gone. But what do children do, and is there a difference between the way children process sentences and adults process sentences? To find out this using eye tracker, they use a screen like this. You can see there is a frog on a napkin on the leftmost corner, and on the right side there is a toy giraffe sitting in a basket, and bottom left you have a napkin, and bottom right you have a frog in a bowl, and the box is in the middle. Okay, so you see top left corner they have written target. Alright, so put that is the target. You have to pick up the frog which is on the napkin and put it in the box. Alright, the giraffe in the basket is the second object, which the sentence doesn't say anything about giraffe. The competitor is another frog, but this frog is not sitting on the napkin. And then you have the destination, which is the box where you have to put. So what happens is, they tested children between 4 and 5 years. The moment when they see two frogs, one on the napkin and another one not on the napkin, children's eye movement showed that they were relying on incremental interpretation, and they were not as good as adults in making use of clues provided by the visual context. See, adults were looking carefully at the visual world presented to them. They said the sentence says put the frog on the napkin, so I pick up that and take it to the destination. Okay, the other frog is not on the napkin, so I won't even go there. So their eyes didn't go towards the non-target item, whereas children started picking up the frog and put it on the napkin. They pick it up and put it on the napkin instead of going to the destination. So there were more looks. What are researchers studying? Where are the eyes looking? You can monitor that in the eye tracker. So there were more looks towards incorrect destination. Instead of the box, which is the destination, children were looking more often at the napkin. Put the frog on the napkin, that's it. Because they are understanding the sentence like that. Put the frog on the napkin. And then only they are going to the rest of the sentence. But adults don't do that. They take the clues from the visual context and they are doing it correctly. In other words, children were choosing syntactically less complex structure, processing it, and then getting confused. So, does it mean then, we talked about parsing. So, are we saying then that child parser is different from adult parser, right? But what we can understand about parsing from, by the way, this way of collecting data using eye tracker is called online processing. It's not about offline, in the sense the child is looking at the thing and you are able to monitor the eye movements as the child is processing. It's immediate. It gives a lot of, this could not be done in the 70s. It's only because of this computerization and eye tracker which is connected to the computer and everything, they're able to collect this data. So online comprehension of sentences by children, what we have learnt is that the cognitive linguistic system develops gradually. That 3 to 4 year old children cannot understand sentences as well as adults. There is a development in sentence comprehension. Second is a parsing system with developmental changes reflecting learning of additional syntactic, prosodic and discourse and referential cues, making use of syntactic cues, prosodic cues, discourse cues, referential cues. What do I mean by referential cues? Whether there is one referent or two referents. If suppose if there are two frogs, children can get confused. If there is one frog and one giraffe, they would not have made that mistake. If there are two frogs, then what are you referring to in the sentence? So these ambiguities, all this develops gradually. Okay, this research has shown that. Thirdly, maturation in non-linguistic cognition. Why is it non-linguistic? Because we are talking about vision, we are talking about what is present in the environment. So maturation in non-linguistic cognition, especially in relation to attention and executive functions of memory, develop gradually. Obviously, because there are a lot of differences in the way children are understanding meaning of sentences and adults are understanding meaning of sentences online. So of course this research continued into 90s, lot of eye tracking research involving even our languages. I came across one study in Canada, Tagalog, a language spoken in Philippines. They used this kind of eye tracking research on children. And they wanted to know what kind of, they compared these two languages because their word orders are very different, alright. So basically there is a lot of discussion about this particular study comparing Tagalog with Kannada. Please refer to the e-text to get more details about these two languages. But basically what they found is that there is language specificity. Depending upon the word order of a given language, you understand the meaning of a sentence differently. Okay, so it's not just matter of maturation of cognitive processes, memory, attention processes, which are universal. After all, we all have the same brain and same mind kind of a thing. That doesn't work. The native language that you are learning influences the way you pay attention to different aspects of the sentence you are hearing or you are reading. So your comprehension of sentences is affected not only by syntactic, semantic, pragmatic, discourse, referential cues, but also by your own native language word order, native language parsing strategies. Alright, let me summarize what we have been discussing in this lecture. We started with derivational theory of complexity, which gave a lot of importance to syntax-centric explanations to the way we understand meaning of sentences of different types, simple, complex, passive, active. Okay, so DTC basically prioritized syntactic factors in comprehension. But a lot of cross-linguistic research has revealed that we have to move away from syntactic factors to mapping of syntax and semantics together. The cross-linguistic research made researchers understand that mapping of syntax and semantics take place simultaneously in helping us understand the meaning of sentences. Then in the 90s, online comprehension experiments using eye trackers endorsed this view much more. Not only that syntax and semantics should be mapped, that we also take cues from the environment. Vision plays a role. Visual clues from the environment also helps us understand the meaning of sentence. That all these processes interact with language specific factors. What kind of word order is your language? Do you, is it SVO or SOV or, several other parsing strategies are also language specific. So all this interact to make us understand the meaning of sentences. So this concludes my lecture and thank you very much.